ILSR EAP project 1546. I would repeat and reiterate that without Frederik's help and generous and kind sharing of the inventory of the Mahabodhi Society journal that he prepared with such effort, it would not have been possible for us to proceed for this project application. So we once again acknowledge Frederik's generous help in that regard. We met Frederik in 2022, as we said, and we did have a conversation that after his Kolkata work at the Mahabodhi Society at Calcutta College Square headquarters, Frederik left for Sarnath, and there he informed me before he left for Germany that he got hold of a treasure trove, as Professor Prabhuti Mukherjee said, that Frederik also said that he got hold of a treasure trove of the notebooks of Anagarika Dharmapala at Sarnath. And I'm happy to share with all of you that recently Frederik's research paper on, this is the research paper, the Anagarika's list, time, space and emotions in the Sarnath notebooks, had got published in the famous journal, South Asia Journal of South Asian Studies. I had the fortune to read this research paper. It's an amazing work of research of looking into the notebooks, the lists that Dharmapala made, and how Frederik gleaned the insight on the list and the entries in that in those notebooks. So without wasting further time, I would welcome Frederik. But before that, Frederik is a researcher of the history of emotions at Max Planck Institute. He also worked on global intellectual history, and he is a Buddhist scholar. You can look into his larger profile by visiting the webpage of the Max Planck Institute for Human Development. So now it is time for us to listen to Frederik. Frederik will speak for 20 to 25 minutes, and then we can have a couple of questions. Over to you, Frederik.
Thank you so much, Aditya, for this kind introduction. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can. We can hear you. And Frederik will share the PowerPoint. Okay.
Yes. Let me just try the screen sharing works. Okay. Yeah. Does it work? See what title?
Frederik, can you please hold for a second? We'll just look at the microphone system. Could you please hold for 1 minute? Am I audible, Frederik, to you?
Yes, yes.
Okay, please hold for a minute.
হ্যাঁ সেই তো কদিন আগে শুরু হলো এর মধ্যে কাজ করে
Frederik, could you speak again? Can you begin, Frederik?
Yeah, sorry?
Yeah, now you are audible. Yes, you proceed now.
Okay. Okay, now you can hear me better. All right, then I'll get going, okay?
Yes.
All right, okay, cool. So, well, thanks Aditya for putting together this great workshop and for inviting me. As you've already introduced me, there isn't much of an introduction for me to say. My name is Frederik Schroer. I work at the Center for the History of Emotions at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development in Berlin. And as Aditya mentioned, I was working in Kolkata in the Mahabodhi Society back in 2022. Now I will give some comments on the Mahabodhi Society and Anagarika Dharmapala. I will share some anecdotes with you on how we got together around this Endangered Archives program, and I hope that Aditya will forgive me for sharing a few a few photos. And then I will also bore you with some notes on two of my projects that are connected to this archive, to this society. So here we go. You know, of course, this building, the Mahabodhi Society of India's headquarters and College Square in Kolkata. And I want to mention, before going any further, that it's particularly pertinent, and I feel particularly honored to be invited to give this talk today, because today is actually the 91st anniversary of the Anagarika Dharmapala's passing on the 29th of April in 1933. So it's a very sort of fitting occasion, I think, to talk about the legacy that he left to us and the organization that he founded. So this, of course, you know, is the Anagarika Dharmapala, who was born in Sri Lanka, or Ceylon as it was then called, in 1864. He established the Mahabodhi Society first in Colombo, in Ceylon, in 1891, and the year after he re-established it, or established the Indian branch of Kolkata, which came after his visit to Bodh Gaya and Sarnath, which for him was a transformative moment in his, and launched his lifelong quest to regain ownership, or to regain stewardship of the Mahabodhi temple in Bodh Gaya by Buddhists. As you will very likely also be aware, Anagarika Dharmapala and the early Mahabodhi Society were firmly connected to several other networks of religious and non-religious actors. And early on, this included specifically the Theosophical Society. Dharmapala himself became a member of the Theosophical Society in 1884 at a very young age, with special permission by Colonel Henry Olcott. And he gave up his government job, his job in the colonial administration in Ceylon, 2 years later, to devote himself entirely to his spiritual study, and in particular to the study of Buddhism and the Theravada Buddhist heritage. When Dharmapala came to Kolkata, he was helped also by these networks, by the networks of the Theosophical Society, and he quickly came into contact with a number of important individuals that helped facilitate his projects, including Nilkamal Mukherjee and Narendranath Sen, who was then the editor of the Indian Mirror. So Anagarika Dharmapala fit sort of snugly into the upper caste Bhadralok Hindu circles in Kolkata at the time, who were, as Abhijit Gupta also mentioned, many people at that time were interested in sort of preserving or rediscovering what they perceived as endangered heritage. As you will also perhaps know, it was in May 1892 that with the founding, or connected to the founding of the Mahabodhi Society in Kolkata, the Journal of the Mahabodhi Society was also founded and published permanently since that year from the Mahabodhi Society. Now, the early purpose of the society, as I already mentioned, was to regain stewardship of key Buddhist sites, particularly Bodh Gaya. And it's perhaps a particular irony, or also typical of these figures of reform, that this dream of Anagarika Dharmapala's was only realized after his passing. So he passed in 1933, and the Bodh Gaya Temple Act was only passed in 1949. So all during his life, he witnessed long legal struggles around the stewardship of the temple. But apart from this sort of more concrete struggle that Dharmapala and the society had for key Buddhist sites, there was also the larger mission, and it's reflected in the journal's subtitle, which is the United Buddhist World. And this really speaks of the syncretism that is also, I know, at the heart of On India's project. And it speaks of the way in which Dharmapala and the Mahabodhi Society connected to Bhadralok and particularly Hindu but also Theosophist circles in Bengal, how he connected to Sri Lanka, but also how he connected to Japan and to the West. Another perhaps particular irony is the fact that before making it to Bodh Gaya, Anagarika Dhammapala had already visited Japan. So that speaks perhaps of the remoteness of this key site, key Buddhist archaeological site at the time, and the need for its rediscovery, or the perceived need for its rediscovery. So who is this sort of Buddhist world that Dhammapala was trying to reunite? We see that it was very strongly upper caste, upper class, that it had strong connections to Hindu circles, organizations such as Theosophy, but then also Western Christians who started publishing articles in the Mahabodhi Journal, and in particular Orientalist scholars of Pali, Sanskrit, and the Buddhist heritage. All of this makes the Mahabodhi Society, and in particular its headquarters in Kolkata, I believe, a key node in the networks of early Buddhism in colonial India, meaning this sort of early reform Buddhism that re-entered the land of India as the Holy Land of Buddhism. Others, including most recently Douglas Ober, have also shed a critical light on the role of the Mahabodhi Society, or also on the focus on the Mahabodhi Society, as he elaborated in his book Dust on the Throne, that was published last year, which is really on this reform movements, Buddhist reform movements in colonial India. But I think even Ober, in his sort of very well-funded critique, that we have put a lot of focus on these certain individuals that typically often are privileged and high-class or high-caste individuals, thereby obscuring other movements, such as, for example, the Dalit and lower-class Buddhist movements, or the existing Buddhist communities in India that are often sort of shadowed by these reform figures. On the other hand, what is also true, and what we can also see in Ober's book, or including Ober's book, is that the archive of the Mahabodhi Society is unmatched. So if you want to tell the story of Buddhism in colonial India, there is no way around this archive. We can be critical of it, but there's no escaping it. Now, allow me to share a few impressions of how we got together and how this connection formed. So it was really Professor Shashwati Mutsuri at the Department of Pali, Kolkata University, who was instrumental in first establishing our contacts, and I'm particularly grateful to her for the help that she offered me and for the very warm welcome that she afforded me in Kolkata on my first visit to Kolkata, as I must shamefully admit that I hadn't been to Kolkata until 2022. So it was her who connected me with Shakti Guha, who of course is the director of the ILSR, and she mentioned that the ILSR staff was sort of vaguely interested in doing something perhaps with the Mahabodhi Society, that there were some plans circulating, so we all got together, connections were made, we met at the university, and then I was fortunate to also come to ILSR, and we had further discussions, and this is also where I met Aditya, and we talked about this project and our ideas that were sort of already, it was visible that we had a large overlap of interest there. Now, going further, as Aditya mentioned, I had been working for several weeks at the Mahabodhi Society, Kolkata College Square, and it was really through the help of Bhante Medankara. You could see in the picture here, it was a full moon day, and we were handing out food donations. And it was really him who, at the end of my work in the Mahabodhi Society headquarters, I remember we had a conversation. We were sitting in his office, and he was telling me, he was asking me whether I knew anything about digitization and how it could be done. And he shared with me the fact that the Mahabodhi Society had been concerned about the need for digitization before, and they had apparently approached private organizations that offered these services, and they were quoted some absolutely outrageous sums of money these private organizations would charge them per page in digitization, which the Mahabodhi Society simply could not do, and luckily also didn't sort of get trapped into doing, I have to say. So what we are talking about, for anyone who needs a reminder, is the Aravind Varuma Library, mostly, in the Mahabodhi Society. Headquarters at College Square, you can see on the image on the left, where there is a large collection of monographs, of periodicals, but then we also have manuscripts in the library and in the shrine. So, as I mentioned, we got together. Here is the picture of that day. We together we visited the Mahabodhi Society. Here's Anindya and Shashwati Woodsley, as well as Dante Medakara, and we were exploring the connection. You can see Anindya really got into it, and we were sort of looking, at their holdings. And you can also see in the picture here, and in this picture, the desolate state of many of the publications that are kept in this library, which are of course very old. They're often on acidic paper that literally disintegrates with decades. And then, as often is the case, there is the problem of bugs. So once we had sort of explored and the connection was made, and Bhante Medakara, who has since then left and who has gone back to Sri Lanka, but at that time he was really instrumental in getting us all together, and he expressed his firm interest in cooperating with Anindya and the ILSR on acquiring this Endangered Archives project. So what one does after, when one plans these things, of course we got together at the Indian Coffee House over coffee and pakoras, and we discussed, the plans, and then it was really, Anindya who was the driving force, who wrote the project proposal. And I mean, my own contribution is infinitesimally small, and it's really his work, and the merit is on successfully acquiring this project, which I think is so important for the larger academic community. Now, a few notes on my project. Anindya asked me to share a few things. So what do I work on? My main project at the Max Planck Institute is called Environment and Emotions. As I mentioned, I work at the Center for the History of Emotions. And it's interested largely in human-environment relations, sort of among South Asian Buddhist reformers, such as Anagarika Dharmapala, but then also on the side of colonial Orientalists, archaeologists, and others who were involved in these discursive networks. So what it does, or what I do, is I trace discourse, mostly, on environmental issues and on nature itself, across the Buddhist networks in the late 19th and early 20th century. So what I'm really after is tracing conceptions of nature, their centrality to Buddhism. I don't need to remind anyone in this room, I believe, of the centrality of the Bodhi tree and its leaves to Buddhist worship and Buddhist conceptions of also history. So I trace their representations, both textual and visual, across the periodicals that, a large part of them are collected at the Mahabodhi Society headquarters. So this includes their own publications, but it also includes the larger network of publications that we can see in this archive, including other Buddhist periodicals from South Asia, Buddhist periodicals from the UK, from the US, theosophical publications, and others. So my project is concerned with the role of, for example, the Bodhi tree and its centrality to these discourses, but it's also concerned with debates on nature and natural environments at archaeological sites. As you know, in the late 19th century, archaeology and the Archaeological Survey of India had just sort of constituted itself as a quote-unquote scientific discipline, and there was a very lively connection between figures, including Dharmapala, and organizations and individuals in archaeology, And many people had many different ideas on how an archaeological site is supposed to look. Is it supposed to be wild? Is it supposed to be a garden? Is it supposed to be a museum? Etc., etc. So what we can see in these sorts of discourses and in these debates, I think, is how conceptions of nature become entangled with all kinds of other categories. They become highly entangled with conceptions, categories of caste and class. They also become entangled with time, space. And of course, they speak of the encounter of the Buddhist tradition with colonial modernity. So, apart from archaeological sites, I'm also looking into other issues, including, for example, the Mahabodhi Society's reactions to the Indian famine of 1896-97, for which the Mahabodhi Society instituted a relief committee collecting donations, both money and objects, that were given out mostly in the 24 South Parganas and in Murshidabad. And for this, then, I was also in the West Bengal State Archives. So, maybe a last note on this project, I want to stress that, as Abhijit Gupta also mentioned in his talk earlier, digitization really allows us, I believe, not just more easy access to sources, and in particular, you know, I mean, I'm reminded of the distance over which we are speaking while I'm sitting in Berlin, Germany, and you are sitting in Kolkata. So it has, of course, long been the privilege of Western scholars to easily travel to the Global South, but I believe that digitization really also opens avenues for scholarship, especially from underprivileged domains elsewhere in the world, of accessing this heritage. But apart from the issue of access, digitization really also allows for specific methodologies and kinds of study that would have been very difficult to undertake earlier. And I'm thinking here in particular of using large collections of data and tracing topics and themes across large ranges of publication, both on a discursive and textual level, but in particular also including the visual domain. Now, as Anitya also already mentioned, after my stay in Kolkata, I went on to Sarnath, Varanasi, and if you'll allow me a few more minutes, I want to share a few notes on what I found in Sarnath and what my thoughts are in that direction. So, as you see on the pictures here, the Mahabodhi Society also has a significant presence there on the site of the Buddha's first sermon. On the left-hand side, you see the very impressively designed guest house of the Mahabodhi Society, and on the right-hand side of the picture, you can see the Anagarika Dhammapala Museum that is operated by the Mahabodhi Society of India. As some of you are perhaps aware, the collection that we have left of Anagarika Dhammapala is spread between several places. And so the Anagarika Dhammapala Trust administrates part of this collection in Sri Lanka. And that includes his diaries, for example. But the Sarnath Museum also has a collection that I think is of particularly high interest for any scholarship that concerns itself with the Mahabodhi Society or the figure of Anagarika Dhammapala. And that collection is, as Anitya already mentioned, the collection of his notebooks. You can see on the left-hand and right-hand side of the slide that there is a plethora of notebooks that are kept in Sarnath, and as you can probably also see, they are kept in less than ideal conditions, which is, of course, something that is not surprising to most scholars who are working with these types of archives in India. Simply, the resources, the manpower, and the expert knowledge is not there. Many of the diaries are mislabeled. They are in immediate and acute danger of literally perishing. I mean, they were falling apart under my fingers as I sort of carefully looked through them. And I believe that it is in dire need, it is another archive that is in dire need of digitization. Why is it an important archive? Because these diaries really give us a direct glimpse into Anagarika Dhammapala's thinking. So the formal diaries that Dhammapala kept and which are now in Sri Lanka, they are very regular diaries, that have entries that are dated by day and year and month, and they record everything that he did and all his travels. But the notebooks are a much more ephemeral kind of collection of anything really that he was interested in and doing at the moment. So we see, traces of what he was reading. We see traces of the people that he was meeting. We see his thoughts. We see his scribbles, as you can see on this page that I put on the center of the slide here. So really, they are in a way less performative than a diary is, because the diary writing has a very strict format. The notebook, you jot down anything that sort of comes to mind, and Dhammapala was a particularly avid taker of notes. So it's a huge collection of notebooks that ranges topics that are incredibly broad. And as Amintya also mentioned, I have just published an article on a very particular topic in these notebooks. So as I was looking through the notebooks and photographing some of them, it struck me that Dhammapala really had an obsession with lists, with making lists. And here are a few examples that I want to talk about. So the lists, you find very quotidian types of lists. You find to-do lists, you find a list of books that he read, lists of people that he met, all kinds of very sort of lists that anybody probably writes at one point or another. But then you also find lists of perhaps more particular shape and more particular content. The list in the middle, or the picture in the middle of this slide, for example, shows you a list that Dhammapala compiled as he was engaging with Theravada Buddhist philosophy. So this is an Abhidhamma list. And for those of you who know particularly about the Theravada tradition, I don't have to remind you that lists are an integral feature of the Pali Canon. The Pali Canon has many, many lists, and the list form, the Matika form, and other forms of it are a key structuring principle of the early Buddhist tradition. So we see Dhammapala also engaging with this ancient practice, this epistemology of early Buddhism, in sort of thinking through the doctrine that he was engaging with in the list form. But then we also see other kinds of lists, and the two slim pictures on the left-hand side of the screen are the beginning of a particularly interesting list, and this is taken in a notebook that is really a ledger format, so it's very tall and very slim. And this list spans over 70 pages in total, and it's a history list, starting at billion years before the birth of the Buddha, then moving on the second page up to the year one, the birth of the Buddha, numbered both in the Buddhist calendar and in the Gregorian calendar. And then proceeds year by year until Dhammapala's present in the 1930s, so this was very late in his life. And as you can see, most of the lines are empty, and a few of them are filled in. And we have to assume that Dhammapala was planning to fill this sort of master list of history in with all kinds of details, both on Buddhist figures, but then also of other figures and events that were going on, both in India and in Europe and in other parts of the world. And what I think this shows in particular, in contrast to the Abhidhamma list, is that Dhammapala was also engaging with practices and epistemologies that were very particular of colonial modernity, including what Benjamin and Benedict Anderson have called empty time, right? So in more classical vernacular historiographies from South Asia, we don't typically have these sorts of historical lists where time and the year comes before the events. So really, he made this list as a matrix to then be filled in with events as he was studying them. And I think this shows sort of the breadth of the kinds of epistemologies that and figures like him were drawing on. Lastly, I want to draw your attention to the third list on the right-hand side, which is really an illustration. And so often his lists also verge into other visual configurations. This one is in cosmology, which is a fairly regular one. We have the realm of the humans in the middle, and then we have, the domains of pretas, etc., below them, and the deva, lokas, and others above. And then we have further classifications around. So that's just to give you a glimpse of the complexity of this one topic list making across these notebooks, which I think are of such high importance for scholarship. And here is a little screenshot of my archive in a shameless self-plug in case you are interested in reading further. The publication is open access, so nobody should have to access it. Now, I'll stop at this point. And I want to thank you for your attention, but I also want to thank, in particular, of course, Avidya and Shakti Guha and all the staff at ILSR for their really, really warm welcome, as well as Shashwati Matsuri at the University of Kolkata. But then I also really want to acknowledge the extreme generosity of the Mahapoli Society in helping me with this project and also being open to the Endangered Archives program and digitization, which, as we already heard before, and everybody knows, is outstanding when you consider the archival landscape, particularly in South Asia, where many smaller archives are not just unable, but really unwilling to open their collections to digitization and making them accessible to virtually anyone in the world.
Thank you so much, Frederik. Am I audible, Frederik, to you? Could you get me, Frederik?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Frederik, for your presentation.